They called me worthless. A janitor invisible to their success, sweeping around their expensive shoes while they discussed million-dollar deals above my head. But worthless men notice everything. And what I noticed in those late-night hours, mopping floors in their gleaming corporate offices, would destroy them all. The moment that changed everything happened on a Tuesday night in November. I was emptying trash cans in the executive conference room when Marcus Chen, the company's chief financial officer, walked in with his laptop bag slung over his shoulder. His eyes swept past me like I was furniture, a gray-haired man in coveralls, invisible and irrelevant. He powered up his laptop and began working, completely oblivious to my presence as I methodically cleaned around him. The arrogance was breathtaking. To him, I was so beneath notice that he felt comfortable conducting sensitive business, while I moved silently through the shadows of his workspace. That's when I saw it. The spreadsheet on his screen contained numbers that made my stomach tighten. Revenue figures, expense reports, tax documentation, all of it flowing past his cursor as he made adjustments. But these weren't the numbers I'd seen in the company's public filings. These were different, much different. I continued my work, my movements steady and unremarkable, but my mind was racing. The cleaning cart's wheels squeaked softly as I pushed it closer to his desk, angling myself to get a better view. Marcus remained completely absorbed in his work, occasionally rubbing his temples as he manipulated the figures. The discrepancies were staggering. The company was reporting significantly lower revenues to the IRS than what they were actually generating. Expenses were being inflated, profits were being hidden, and money was being shuffled through shell companies I'd never heard of. This wasn't creative accounting. This was systematic fraud. I finished cleaning the conference room and moved to the adjacent offices, but my mind remained locked on those numbers. 23 years I'd worked for Meridian Industries, pushing a mop and emptying trash cans, watching these people build their empire on lies while treating me like I didn't exist. The humiliation had been constant and deliberate. Jennifer Walsh, the CEO, had a particular gift for making me feel subhuman. She'd walk into a room where I was cleaning and immediately wrinkle her nose, as if my presence offended her sensibilities. She'd snap her fingers at me when she wanted something moved, never bothering to learn my name despite 2 decades of faithful service. Her favorite phrase echoed in my memory: "He's just the janitor." She'd say it whenever someone questioned whether I should be in the room during sensitive meetings. Just the janitor, as if those 3 words erased my humanity, my intelligence, my worth as a human being. But the worst had been last month's incident. I'd been cleaning the break room when I overheard 2 junior executives discussing a safety issue with the building's electrical system. Being a former electrician before I took this job, I knew the problem they were describing could cause a fire. I approached them respectfully, explained my background, and offered to help identify the issue before someone got hurt. Jennifer had walked in during my explanation. Her face had flushed with anger, and she'd torn into me with a viciousness that still made my jaw clench. How dare I interrupt her employees? How dare I pretend to have expertise beyond pushing a mop? I was overstepping my bounds, forgetting my place, acting above my station. Then came the words that burned deepest. "You're worthless beyond your ability to clean our floors. Don't ever forget that." The 2 executives had looked away, embarrassed by her cruelty, but too cowardly to intervene. I'd stood there holding my mop, while she explained in excruciating detail how easily replaceable I was, how I should be grateful for the opportunity to work in the same building as my betters. That night, I'd gone home to my small apartment and sat in my kitchen, staring at my reflection in the dark window. Worthless. The word had echoed in my mind like a death sentence. At 62 years old, maybe she was right. Maybe I was just a janitor, destined to live in the shadows of more important people. But now, with Marcus Chen's fraudulent spreadsheets burned into my memory, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: purpose. I began staying later, working slower, observing more carefully. The cleaning schedule gave me access to every office, every computer, every conversation that happened after hours. I was invisible to them, which made me the perfect spy. Over the following weeks, I pieced together the scope of their operation. It wasn't just tax fraud. It was a sophisticated money laundering scheme that had been running for years. They were stealing from their own investors, hiding profits in offshore accounts, and using a network of shell companies to obscure the paper trail. The key players were Marcus Chen, Jennifer Walsh, and David Rodriguez, the company's chief operating officer. They'd meet every Thursday night in Jennifer's office, thinking they were safe from prying eyes. But I was always there, emptying trash cans, dusting furniture, invisible in my gray coveralls. I learned their system. Marcus would manipulate the financial reports, Jennifer would authorize the transfers, and David would coordinate with their offshore partners. The money flowed through a web of companies with names like Coastal Holdings, Mountain View Investments, and Pacific Rim Trading, all fake entities designed to confuse auditors. But they'd made one crucial mistake. They'd forgotten that worthless people have nothing to lose. I began documenting everything. My phone became my weapon, discreetly photographing documents, recording conversations, capturing evidence of their crimes. I was methodical, patient, building an airtight case that even the best lawyers couldn't defend. The irony wasn't lost on me. Jennifer Walsh, who'd spent years telling me I was worthless, was about to learn that worthless people make the most dangerous enemies. My opportunity came on a Friday night in December. I was cleaning Jennifer's office when I noticed she'd left her laptop open, logged into the company's financial system. This was it, my chance to access the master files, the ones that contained the complete picture of their fraud. I glanced at the security camera in the corner, noting its blind spot behind Jennifer's desk. I'd studied that camera for months, timing its rotation, understanding its field of view. I had exactly 47 seconds before it would capture this area again. I moved quickly, my fingers flying across the keyboard. Years of watching them work had taught me their passwords, their security protocols, their digital habits. I accessed the offshore account records, the shell company documentation, the correspondence with their criminal partners. The evidence was overwhelming. $47 million in hidden profits, $16 million in tax avoidance, a conspiracy that reached into multiple countries and involved dozens of co-conspirators. They'd been stealing from the government, their investors, their employees, everyone who trusted them. I downloaded everything to a secure drive, carefully covering my tracks. The camera rotated back toward the desk just as I resumed cleaning, my expression unchanged, my movement steady. To anyone watching, I was just a janitor doing his job. But inside, I was transformed. I wasn't worthless anymore. I was justice incarnate. The next phase required careful planning. I couldn't simply send the evidence to the IRS and hope for the best. I needed to ensure they'd take it seriously, that they'd investigate thoroughly, that the evidence would be admissible in court. I researched whistleblower protocols, IRS procedures, federal fraud statutes. I learned about the False Claims Act, the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, the specific penalties for corporate tax fraud. I wanted to understand exactly how much damage I could inflict, how thoroughly I could destroy them. The IRS had a special unit for complex fraud cases, with agents trained specifically to handle corporate conspiracies. I studied their case histories, their success rates, their preferred methods of evidence presentation. I would give them a gift so perfectly wrapped that conviction would be inevitable. But I also wanted them to know. I wanted Jennifer Walsh to understand that her worthless janitor had brought down her empire. I wanted Marcus Chen to realize that the invisible man had been watching all along. I wanted David Rodriguez to know that their arrogance had created their own destroyer. The plan crystallized on a cold January morning. I would submit the evidence to the IRS anonymously, but I would also ensure that Jennifer knew exactly who had destroyed her. The timing would be perfect, a symphony of revelation and retribution that would leave them no escape. I spent weeks preparing the submission. The evidence package was enormous. Financial records, correspondence, account statements, shell company documentation, recorded conversations. I organized it chronologically, cross-referenced it by participant, and included a detailed summary that would guide investigators through the conspiracy. The IRS package alone was over 300 pages, but I also prepared copies for the SEC, the FBI, and the State Attorney General's office. I wanted them surrounded, overwhelmed, facing prosecution from multiple angles simultaneously. The submission had to be perfect. I printed everything on a public library printer, using cash to pay for copies. I wore gloves to avoid fingerprints, used generic envelopes and labels, mailed from different post offices across the city. I left no trace that could be traced back to me. But the real masterpiece was the timing. I chose a Tuesday morning in February, exactly 3 months after I'd first witnessed Marcus Chen's fraud. I arrived at work early, prepared for what would be my last day as their worthless janitor. The IRS packages had been mailed the previous Friday. By Tuesday morning, federal agents would be reviewing the evidence, preparing warrants, building cases. But Jennifer Walsh would still be blissfully unaware of the storm approaching. I went through my normal routine, cleaning offices, emptying trash, invisible in my gray coveralls. But this time, I was counting down the hours until their world collapsed. At exactly 10:47 a.m., I watched through the conference room window as 3 black SUVs pulled into the executive parking lot. Federal agents in suits climbed out, carrying boxes of documents and wearing expressions of grim determination. The IRS had arrived. I continued cleaning, my movements steady and unremarkable, but my heart was pounding with anticipation. Through the building's intercom system, I heard the receptionist's confused voice announcing that federal agents were requesting to speak with senior management. Jennifer Walsh's office was 2 doors down from where I was working. I heard her heels clicking rapidly across the marble floor, her voice sharp with anxiety as she barked orders at her assistant. She had no idea that her worthless janitor was watching her panic with cold satisfaction. The agents presented their warrants with professional efficiency. They seized computers, files, phones, and personal items. They questioned employees, secured offices, and began the methodical process of dismantling the conspiracy I'd exposed. Marcus Chen emerged from his office looking pale and shaken. He tried to maintain his composure, but I could see the fear in his eyes as agents escorted him to a conference room for questioning. The man who'd worked so casually while I cleaned around him now looked like a trapped animal. David Rodriguez attempted to leave through the rear exit, but agents were waiting for him. He was led back inside, his expensive suit wrinkled, his confidence shattered. The COO, who'd coordinated with offshore criminals, was about to face the full weight of federal prosecution. But Jennifer Walsh was my primary target. I watched her try to take control of the situation, her voice rising as she demanded to know the agent's authority, their jurisdiction, their right to invade her company. She was fighting like a cornered predator, but she was already defeated. The lead agent, a stern woman in her 40s, remained unmoved by Jennifer's protests. She calmly explained that they were investigating violations of federal tax law, money laundering statutes, and fraud regulations. The evidence was overwhelming, the warrants were valid, and the investigation was just beginning. I saw the exact moment when Jennifer realized the scope of the disaster. Her face went white, her hands began to shake, and she sat down heavily in her chair. The CEO, who'd built her empire on lies, was watching it crumble in real time. The agents worked methodically through the day, seizing evidence, conducting interviews, building their case. I continued cleaning around them, invisible as always, but now I was savoring every moment of their investigation. By afternoon, the entire executive floor was in chaos. Employees whispered nervously in hallways, wondering if they'd be implicated, if their jobs were secure, if the company would survive. The criminal conspiracy I'd exposed was destroying everything they'd built. But my revenge wasn't complete. I needed Jennifer Walsh to know that her worthless janitor had orchestrated her downfall. I waited until the agents finished their initial sweep and left for the day. The building was quiet, most employees having fled early to avoid the chaos. Jennifer was in her office, staring at her empty desk where her computer had been seized. I knocked on her door frame, my cleaning cart beside me, exactly as I'd appeared countless times before. She looked up with irritation, probably planning to vent her fury at the nearest available target. But something in my expression must have given her pause. For the first time in 23 years, Jennifer Walsh really looked at me. Not through me, not past me, but at me. And in that moment, I saw the recognition dawn in her eyes. I reached into my coveralls and pulled out a single sheet of paper, a copy of the IRS complaint I'd submitted, with my handwritten note at the bottom. From your worthless janitor. You forgot that worthless people have nothing to lose. I placed it on her desk and stepped back, watching as she read it with growing horror. Her hands trembled as she held the paper, her face cycling through disbelief, fury, and finally, devastating comprehension. Jennifer Walsh, the CEO who'd spent years telling me I was worthless, now understood that I'd been the architect of her destruction. The invisible man in gray coveralls had been watching, documenting, planning her downfall for months. She tried to speak, but no words came. What could she say? That she was sorry for the years of humiliation? That she'd underestimated me? That she'd created her own nemesis through her cruelty? I didn't need her apology. I didn't want her excuses. I just wanted her to know that actions have consequences, that treating people like they're worthless has a price. I turned and walked away, leaving her alone with the wreckage of her empire. Behind me, I heard the paper crumple as she crushed it in her fists, but the damage was already done. The federal investigation was unstoppable. The evidence was overwhelming, and her criminal conspiracy was finished. The next morning, news of the federal investigation hit the business press. Meridian Industries was front-page news with headlines screaming about tax fraud, money laundering, and executive corruption. The company's stock price collapsed, Their business partners fled, and their carefully constructed reputation crumbled overnight. Marcus Chen was arrested at his home before dawn, led away in handcuffs while news cameras captured his humiliation. The CFO who'd worked so carelessly in front of his invisible janitor was now facing 20 years in federal prison. David Rodriguez tried to flee the country, but federal agents intercepted him at the airport. The COO, who'd coordinated with offshore criminals, was dragged back to face justice, his passport confiscated, his assets frozen. Jennifer Walsh held out the longest, hiring expensive lawyers and claiming innocence. But the evidence I'd gathered was too comprehensive, too detailed, too damning. Within weeks, her legal team was negotiating a plea agreement, hoping to minimize her prison sentence. The investigation expanded rapidly. The IRS discovered additional tax fraud schemes, the FBI uncovered money laundering operations, and the SEC found securities violations. My evidence had opened a door that revealed years of criminal activity, implicating dozens of co-conspirators across multiple countries. The final indictments were handed down 6 months later. Jennifer Walsh received 15 years in federal prison. Marcus Chen got 18 years. David Rodriguez was sentenced to 22 years. Their criminal empire, built on lies and maintained through arrogance, was completely destroyed. Meridian Industries collapsed within a year. The company that had treated me like I was worthless was liquidated to pay fines, restitution, and legal fees. The building where I'd worked for 23 years was sold to pay creditors. The empire that had seemed so permanent was erased as if it had never existed. But my revenge had a final perfect twist. The IRS whistleblower reward for exposing tax fraud is typically 15 to 30% of the recovered funds. My evidence had helped them recover $47 million in hidden profits, plus penalties and interest. The reward check that arrived in my mailbox was for $14.2 million. Jennifer Walsh, who'd spent years telling me I was worthless, had inadvertently made me a multimillionaire. The woman who'd claimed I should be grateful for the opportunity to clean her floors had enriched me beyond her wildest dreams. I used part of the money to establish a foundation for workers' rights, focusing on protecting employees from workplace harassment and discrimination. The rest I invested quietly, living modestly but comfortably, knowing that justice had been served. Sometimes I drive past the empty building where Meridian Industries used to operate. The offices are dark, the parking lot is empty, and weeds grow through cracks in the pavement. It's a monument to the consequences of treating people like they're worthless. Jennifer Walsh is currently serving her sentence in a federal facility in Pennsylvania. She'll be 73 when she's released, assuming she lives that long. Marcus Chen is in a different facility in Texas, and David Rodriguez is in Florida. They'll never see each other again. Their conspiracy destroyed by the invisible man they dismissed as worthless. I kept one memento from my time at Meridian Industries. The gray coveralls I wore during those final days of my investigation, they hang in my closet now. A reminder of the power of being underestimated, of the danger of treating people like they don't matter. The wealthy executives who built their empire on lies learned a hard lesson about the worthless janitor who swept around their feet. In their arrogance, they forgot that invisible people see everything, that dismissed people remember everything, and that worthless people have nothing to lose. They called me worthless, but I showed them the true meaning of value. I was worth their empire, their freedom, their carefully constructed lives. I was worth everything they had, and I took it all. In the end, the worthless janitor proved to be the most expensive employee they'd ever had, and that lesson cost them everything.